Okay, so I think it's fair to say that as an aquarium hobbyist, one of the absolute best aspects of the aquarium hobby is getting to feed your fish. Of course, not all tanks are like this, and it's not going to be as fun, but they are equally fun in their own way. I have a question though. Are we feeding our fish enough? Are we feeding our fish the right amounts? How much should we be feeding? How often? Does size matter? Does age matter? Does the type of fish matter? Etc. Today I kind of want to discuss that. Okay, little disclaimer before we begin. Depending on the source that you read, there's about 34,000 fish that are scientifically described on the planet. 15,000 of those are freshwater. Now, believe it or not, those fish are all discovered in surface water, meaning lakes, rivers, streams, swamps, that sort of thing, where we can actually collect the fish. It's not including glaciers, of course, or underground water sources. Fresh surface water only accounts for 0.3% of the world's water, yet we found half the fish in it. I guess the point of where I'm getting at is this video is going to be focusing only on freshwater fish, as of course I am a freshwater hobbyist, and all of the fish in here are freshwater as well. That's not where I was going with this. Oh, probably needless to say, I'm not going to be making this video to cover how those 15,000 freshwater fish need to be fed, what you need to feed them, how often, etc., etc. This is going to be a general video and some real world information that you can put to use on your aquariums. However, right below this video is the comment section. If you'd like to share your experience with your fish, how you feed, etc., if you'd like to elaborate on this video or ask your questions or get detailed or specific questions answered, make sure you ask them in the comment section below. There's an entire community, and I've always said that's the second half of the video. So I think we should start off with the very basics. How often should you feed your fish? Now this is going to be really simple to follow. For juvenile fish, I like to feed 3 times a day if I can. For adolescents, 2 times a day, and of course for adults, 1 time a day. However, when it comes to pretty big fish, I usually feed 6 times a week, 1 time a day. So once a week, I fast this tank, for example. Even Hook gets fasting. Why? It just lets them clear everything out of their system, continues to keep them interested in food, because when it comes to big fish, for those that keep big fish, realize and probably have experienced before, they can sometimes stop eating, become disinterested in their food. You kind of want to keep them hungry. The reason being is, at this size, they're almost done growing. Not a lot of the nutrition and energy and calories that they're getting from their food is actually going towards growth anymore. Feeding them 3 times a day is really just polluting the water. We feed our fish so they will have energy reserves to grow. Once he gets to an adult size, we just really need to keep him healthy, keep him alive and satisfied. Feeding him too much is going to lead to 2 things. 1, pollution of the aquarium, unneeded food, he's not using it to grow anymore, and of course, he'll just grow into a fat and unhealthy fish with a shortened lifespan. Which brings up the topic, how much should you be feeding? Like, what's the quantity of food you should feed? We'll start with big fish because that's what we just ended on. When it comes to big fish, I break it down specifically as to what they're getting. Now, based on my experience and all of the research and documentations that's been shared all over the internet, it's been found that between 1 to 3% of your fish's total body weight is what you should be feeding on a daily basis. This is just for optimal growth as well as health and water quality. I think a big problem is a lot of people overfeed their fish. We'll be getting to that in a moment, and this is only going to apply to big fish. We will get to the little fish here in a second. This is where we break out a measuring tape. We'll actually do Hook. So Hook is about 10 inches long, he's about 4 inches tall, and 1.5 inch of girth or width. He's got a couple more inches to put on to become a full-grown Oscar, but his growth over the next year is probably going to be very slow before he gets to that 12 inches. But if I had to estimate, if you buy a little Oscar, that's what it's going to look like in 1 year. So knowing Hook is 10 inches long, 4 inches tall, 1.5 inch wide, he's about 60 cubic inches of fish. Now, a cubic inch of fish weighs about 10 grams, so he weighs about 600 grams or 1.25 pounds or something along those lines. 1% of that is 6 grams, 2%, 12 grams, 3%, 18 grams. Let me illustrate what this actually looks like, though. So this is about 12 grams of food, 2% of Hook's body weight. That's not a bad amount to feed them, probably a little bit more than I would feel comfortable with, but again, it looks more than it is because these are actually floating sticks. They're a little more spongy to be able to float. Here's something a little bit more realistic. Each one of these pellets, far more compact, they sink. This is about 12 grams of food as well, each one weighing about a half gram. So on a daily basis, this is pretty much what Hook gets, sometimes a little less than that. Now for me, when it comes to feeding my fish, I know exactly what they're eating, meaning I know exactly what the waste amount is going to be, so I can calculate exactly how much biological filtration I'm actually going to require. Now I'm not saying you have to weigh your food out every day, but for me, I know a rough little tiny mittful of these pellets is essentially what he's going to need or require for the day. As for little fish. Oh, and I know that I'm repeating a lot of information from my book. I know that those have it, already know all of these calculations, but I know a lot don't. When it comes to little fish, for example, like these rainbows, I only feed them a small amount. Essentially, whatever they can eat in about, I don't know, 2 minutes. 2 to 3 minutes is what I will feed them. Now, since there's so many fish, I do have to feed quite a bit at once so they can get it from the bottom as well as the mid-water. If you have time and patience, you can drop a little bit at a time till they stop eating. But typically speaking, 2 to 3 minutes is what I'm giving these guys. The same rule applies for my bigger community tanks. Even though these guys are much larger, and I could, of course, probably calculate the size of all of these vieja, I still give them what these guys can eat in about 3 minutes as well. But they just simply get bigger mittfuls. Now again, the biggest thing that we can focus on here is truly paying attention to your fish, watching them, studying them, getting to know them a lot better. A lot of the information you're going to hear in this video, maybe you won't be able to use it, but if I can get one point across is to just simply monitor your fish. They will tell you far more than any YouTube video ever could. Biggest thing you want to focus on is don't overfeed because you'll end up with an unhealthy fish and of course a polluted aquarium, which of course leads to ammonia and cycling issues, which again could kill your fish. So we know how much and how often you should be feeding your fish at this point, but what should you be feeding your fish? It's interesting that many people talk about simulating a wild diet. Let me make this point entirely clear. You will never accomplish that in the home aquarium, period. These guys are on feeding schedules. They don't have a never-ending food supply. For example, my trophies are from Lake Tanganyika. These guys are largely a herbivoric fish. From sun up to sun down, they are grazing on algae and microorganisms all day long. You will never do that in the home aquarium, although I do try to grow algae in all of my tanks so that all fish can graze on it a little bit, because believe it or not, almost all of these fish in every tank do it besides the Oscar. But what if we were to actually try to simulate a wild diet? These guys are herbivoric fish. Why not just give them a herbivoric diet? There's a big problem with that. There was a book written, I believe around 10 years ago, called Marine Ornamental Species, Collection, Culture, and Conservation. Anyways, there's a chapter within it titled Captive Nutritional Management of Herbivorous Reef Fish Using Surgeonfish as a Model. This was a really interesting study that they did, and one that I hope to replicate to a certain extent at some point so we can get further documentation. There's actually a few things that I would like to do. However, it will involve fish becoming unhealthy. But the end result is always far more beneficial than the sacrifice. With that said, there was 3 control groups done. One was fed nothing but algae or like a seaweed of some sort. In fact, it was called ulva. Another group was fed exclusively pellets, and another group was fed exclusively flake foods. These were all juvenile surgeonfish. Now we do know that surgeonfish are largely herbivoric, constantly grazing all day long, but what if we just gave them what we think they specifically require, which is just a herbivoric diet? Well, about 40% lost an extreme amount of weight, and about 60% ended up dying before the experiment was done. This was, of course, done over the course of many weeks. But I guess the moral of the story with this here is, just because we hear the word herbivore, is that all they need is some seaweed or whatever the case might be, or spirulina, or we think that we just should give them that? Interestingly enough, when the group offered flake foods, fared a little bit better. Most of them gaining weight, but in the end, about 39% of the fish within that control group died. What does that say? Well, of course, in flake foods or prepared foods that are commercially available, there will be a little bit more that the fish require in that food. But based on the way that flakes are made, should fish be exclusively put on that diet? Absolutely not. Now, when it came to pellets, all of the fish lived and all gained weight. They were fine. What's the difference between pellets and flakes? Well, right here is about 2 grams of flakes. That's a lot of food, quantity, amount, taking up that much space just to feed 2 grams. What does that translate to? It's a lot of waste in the aquarium. There's no way the fish are going to be able to eat all this before you pollute the tank. Plus, it must be said that the way that flakes are created versus pellets, I believe that a lot of the nutritional value is lost in flakes. However, we all have a ton of small fish that really enjoy them, and it's okay to feed them if it's not exclusive, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now here is 2 grams of pellets. Anybody notice the difference here? Much, much smaller amount to an extent. What's that mean? More nutrition packed into a much smaller diet. Dump this into an aquarium versus that handful of flakes. Which one's going to pollute the most? What are your fish going to get the most out of? Kind of think about that. That's not really the point. I think flakes are fine. Pellets are definitely better in terms of nutritional value and how much actually you're getting into your fish. And of course, pellets come in a variety of shapes and sizes. But I guess it does put things into perspective. One of the things that we really need to talk about, and the most important aspect of this entire video, is what should you actively be feeding your fish? I'm going to be very blunt here. This entire racking system eats twice a day. They get 2 different types of food. A lot of the times I'll just mix it together. I will feed them a herbivoric and a carnivorous diet. A lot of times, like I said, I'll just take the pellets, if I'm feeding pellets, to mix them together. I give them all at once type of deal. This ensures they're getting everything that they possibly could require, because a varied diet is far more important than, and I see this all the time, people reading the back of a label, reading the crude protein, or the first 3 ingredients on the list is so unpopular thing to do. And then calling that a good staple. I don't think that's a good idea. I think you need a far more varied diet than that by introducing at least 2 staples to the diet. And if you don't know what to feed, everybody here, everybody in the gallery gets 2 things. Something with a herbivoric substance to it, whether it's kelp or algae or spirulina of some sort in it, as well as a higher protein diet that contains something that is meaty within the first 3 ingredients and a higher than 40% crude protein matter. Even more importantly is the talking about brands. Which brands should you be feeding? What's on the back of the list, etc., etc. My suggestion would be to feed whatever is most commonly available in your area, because eventually you're going to run out of foods. Pick the 2 best foods that focus on a little bit of herbivoric and carnivorous diet, and I think feeding the both of them, almost regardless of whatever type of fish that you have. Even my trophies that are extremely prone to bloat if given too high of a protein diet, they are doing just fine on this diet as well. I guess I could make the comparison of I need about 2,000 calories a day to maintain health. I could eat a couple Big Macs and some big fries and get my 2,000 calories that way. What do you think I would look like after about 6 months of just eating that? A lot of empty calories, just because I love it, because it's a treat type of thing, versus eating the same amount of calories in chicken and broccoli and rice and, you know, adhering to a more healthy diet. Which one do you think long-term is going to suit me? And really apply that to your fish. And in the hobby, I think we've focused too much on feeding one amount of food, calling it a staple, and that's good enough, where in my opinion, it's just not. So I guess to summarize this video, don't overfeed your fish and give them a varied diet.